Hello, good evening to everybody. Welcome to Youth Mental Health Live. My name is Sean Skinner and I lead our youth work here at SGSG Ashtead. We've got a great panel lined up for you tonight, plenty of things to talk about. But before we go any further, we'd love to talk to you about how you can get involved and some ground rules to get us started. So if you've got a question, you can pop it in the chat. We've got one of our team looking after you in there. I'm sure Ollie will say hello in the chat at some point. And you can also submit your questions anonymously through Slido. The instructions are at the bottom of your screen. Go to sli.do and use the code YMHL, which stands for Youth Mental Health Live. Your questions in there are completely anonymous. We've got no way of knowing who you are, so that's a great way if you're not sure about your question. And it'd be good to go over just a couple of ground rules for those of you who want to interact in the chat and to ask some questions. Don't discuss directly your own or others' personal lives, or use names or descriptions that might identify either yourself or a friend. No question is a stupid question. You can ask it confidentially using Slido if you're not sure. It's okay to disagree, it's okay to have different opinions, but it's not okay to make fun of other people or to judge someone else. And finally, if you're someone who's in need of help or support, or perhaps your friend is, then we've got some ideas for you to check out. They're in the description of this video, and I'm sure our panel will be mentioning them as we go through things. So it will be best to crack on. The first person I'm going to interview, well, it's not interview even, I'm just going to introduce it, is Jane Kinder. Jane Kinder works for CAMHS. She's a child wellbeing practitioner, and she's going to start by sharing with us about worry and our moods and what that means. So Jane, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Sean. Yeah, just to reiterate, I'm a children's wellbeing practitioner and I work for CAMHS, and just the idea of the children's wellbeing practitioners is a new service in CAMHS. The idea is young people get early help with their mild to moderate mental health difficulties, and children wellbeing practitioners are based in schools. So the idea is we're a bit more accessible now. I know that historically CAMHS has been it's been renowned for like a long waiting list and things like that. So yeah, that's just to highlight. And yeah, just to say it's a difficult year. It's been really difficult with lots of change and uncertainty. And just to say that you know, it's okay to have times when it feels difficult, to have times when you feel low and you feel anxious about what's going on around you, and that's perfectly normal. What I've put together is just some top tips, some things that I hope you might find helpful. These are things that I've talked to young people over the years about to help them manage their mood and their well-being and anxiety as well. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is how to sort of manage your mood and your well-being during this time of lockdown and yeah, and sort of the uncertainty of when schools are going back and things like that. First thing is be kind to yourself. You know, it's okay to have times where you find it's hard. Really important to keep connected with friends and family. We like to say it as, you know, have a bit of a backup team of people in your lives. Could be grandparents, friends, uncles, parents, people that motivate and support you. And yeah, try and spend time with people that lift your mood as well at this time. It's quite easy to focus on the negative. Important to keep a daily routine going for your well-being and your mood. And if we look after ourselves physically, it helps us cope with what's going on around us a bit more. The things like your sleep, try and keep to a sleep routine, like go to bed and get up at the same time each day. And try and avoid too many screens before bedtime and things like that. Exercise is important, even though we don't feel like it, to try and get out and do a bit of exercise every day. Even just a walk, a bit of fresh air, cycle, whatever you're interested in. And also just to try to eat as healthily and regularly as you can. I mean, too much sugar and caffeine can affect your sleep and also your mood as well. So another thing that's quite good is to do things you enjoy and value and that are meaningful to you, that make you feel good about yourself. And I think at this time, it feels like so many limitations of what we can't do. Just try and remember what you used to enjoy doing, and just to try and make those things happen. I think we have to be a bit more creative, don't we? Because we can't get out as much. But yeah. Another good thing is to try and do something for someone else. Just things like do some cooking or baking for someone, text someone you haven't heard from for a while, that sort of thing. Another thing is to, it's quite easy to focus on all the negatives at the moment, and just to try and think of some of the positives about the situation we're in. We call it gratitude, really, things that we're grateful for. And we suggest to some young people that you can do things like a gratitude diary, like every day just write something good that happened in the day. Or you can make like a box and put things you're grateful for in the box, and when you're having a bit of a down of a day, you can pick one thing out of the box just to remind yourself of the good things that are going on for you. And the last thing about mood and well-being is just to, it's really easy, as I knew at the beginning, to just really focus on the news and social media and all the negative stuff that's going on, and that can really lower our mood as well. So just be aware that you need to kind of balance that with positive things as well. So, the next thing I'm going to talk about is about worry, because you know it is a worrying time at the moment sometimes, and worry, or anxiety as we call it, is also a normal part of life. You know, we all get anxious and worried. It's part of living. And anxiety can affect how we think and feel and behave. And often, what we tend to do is we have a worry in our head, and it goes round and round in our head, and it consumes our thinking, and that's all we think about. And then it's really hard to sort of enjoy what's going on around you. And so I'm just going to give you a few techniques to try and sort of break that cycle of worry a bit. And one thing is quite good is to have, we talk about having set aside, it's called a worry time every day. It could be like just 10-15 minutes a day, and you kind of set the time for yourself, say 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you have any worries that come up in the day, just to either sort of write them down and just plan to think about them during that worry time. And that just stops worry just carrying through the whole day and dominating our thinking the whole day, just to get used to kind of saying, no, I'm going to think about that during the worry time. And some people find it quite helpful to share that, have someone you talk to during that worry time, just to offload to and things like that. So some people find it helpful to write down your worries, like have a worry diary, or even on your phone. I think a lot of the time worries dominate our heads, fill our heads, and sometimes the activity of just writing something down just gets it out of our heads and onto a piece of paper, and just helps sort of remove it from our thinking. Another good thing is, it's just overwhelming at the moment. It can be at times, and it's about working out in your life what you can control and what you can't control. There's quite a lot of things at the moment we can't control what's going on, like, you know, the decisions the governments are making about schools opening or staying closed, and what's happening sort of out in the big world. But to remind yourself of the bits you can control, and to try and do something about those things. Also have someone, like I mentioned earlier, just have someone you can talk to about your worries, because it really helps just to talk to someone and to get them, again, to vocalize and get them out of your head. And it kind of breaks the cycle a bit. And then if you have talked about them with someone. Some people find it quite helpful to try and problem solve if there's a particular worry you have, maybe about school or homework, or is just to come up with talk to someone about come up with a list of how to solve that problem, and maybe select a couple of those solutions to try out. Sometimes they don't work, so you just go back to the list and try something else, and it's just sort of actively thinking about and facing the problem rather than just go on to the next thing, avoiding it. You need to, if you have got a worry, you need to try and avoid, we call it avoiding. So sometimes if you have a worry, it's easy just not to face it and just to but that kind of keeps the worry going. So the best thing you can do is to try and sort of identify what the worry is, and then try and come up with a plan to sort of face that worry, if it's something that you can do something about, of course. Yeah, another thing that's quite good is to try and be aware of your thinking. And often our worries, our feeling of worry and anxiety comes from a thought that's unhelpful. You know, one example is, you know, I'm going to fail my exams, that sort of thing. And what you need to try and do is to change that unhelpful thought that's making you feel worried and anxious into a helpful thought. And part of that is asking yourself a few questions, things like, you know, what would my friends say to me if I told them? That was my thought. What would they say? What would my parents say? What would I say to a friend that was telling me they were going to fail their exams? So those sort of things just help you try and change that unhelpful thought into a more helpful thought. And if it becomes a more helpful thought, then those feelings of anxiety will lessen. And also be aware there's some really unhelpful thinking styles that we all do. I mean, it's, you know, it's across the board. Things like we tend to fortune tell, we tend to predict the future. And particularly at the moment, because we don't know what the future looks like, it's easy to see it as really bad and negative. And that can make us feel anxious. And just to be aware of that, we can do that. We can sort of look too far into the future and think, what if, and then it's going to be really, really bad, sort of thing. Another thing is we tend to pay attention to all the negative things that are happening and tend to ignore the positives. And just being aware that we're doing that can help us challenge ourselves to, you know, look out for the positive things that are going on at the moment, because it might feel like it's all bad, but there are some positive things in there somewhere. And yeah, I think that's it. I think I've covered everything. So
lovely. Thank you, Jay. I wonder, just before we go any further, there was a lot there, a lot of practical things. But perhaps for someone watching, is there a difference between the two things you mentioned, worry and anxiety?
I think, from my point of view, I think we use them interchangeably. I think anxiety is more of a sort of technical term. I think anxiety becomes more of an issue is when it stops us doing normal daily things in life. You know, sort of anxiety can lead to us not going to school or not going out to see our friends, and so partly I think we use anxiety more, really, but I think they're sort of a similar thing, really. So
okay, thank you, that's really helpful. And the reason I asked that is we're going to next go to Amelia Scott. Amelia is a student, but someone who has journeyed with specifically anxiety in the past. So good evening, Amelia. Thank you for joining us. Do you want to tell us some of your story and your journey?
Yeah, sure. Obviously mine's going to be a bit more personal than practical advice like Jane's, but I'll do my best. So I was diagnosed with anxiety in year 10, clearly I'm not from the UK, so I grew up in the US. I was born there, raised there, and moved here about 3.5 years ago. But I was diagnosed with anxiety before that, and I just want to put it out there because I wish someone would have said this to me when I was started experiencing it, that nothing has to happen for you to develop anxiety, which is why personally I would say it's different than worry, just because it becomes a daily thing. But it didn't stop me from going to school or anything, but that's, incredibly personal. It's different for everyone. So I started getting it. It came in the form of stomach aches and like a tightness in the chest. And that's when I knew something was wrong. And I experienced that for almost a year before deciding to do something about it. I did talk to my mom about it, but we couldn't really figure out what was going on. So, it just let it go. But it became so normal for me that I wanted to do something about it. Eventually I went to the doctor. I was lucky enough to, get an appointment, and we went through all my symptoms and how I was feeling, and she diagnosed me with anxiety and recommended that I go see a therapist, a cognitive behavioral therapist. And so I went to that therapy for about 6 months, and that was right before I moved to the UK. And then we moved over that summer in 2017. And then once we moved, I obviously stopped going to therapy because I didn't have one here. But I also thought I was feeling better. But then I started getting those feelings again, the symptoms, and I recognized that that was a problem. And I've talked to my mom again, and we were able to find me a new therapist here. I feel very fortunate for that. I attended that therapist for about a year. And then right before sixth form started, I thought I was feeling better. I felt good, so I started sixth form. And then throughout sixth form, I experienced quite a few family health issues that redeveloped those feelings, as well as just regular friend issues, life issues, stress, exams, school. It all builds up. It can, become overwhelming. So I went back to the therapist and did that for another about 8 months. And I've only recently come out of it in September, right before I started uni. And I've been at uni since last September. And I think throughout my journey, I was really fortunate to have good friends and, nice teachers to open up to, which is what I would really recommend to anyone, because especially now more than ever, people are incredibly understanding of feelings of worry and anxiety and all of this, because there's so much going on and no one's expected to be able to handle all of it by themselves. And your friends, I talk to my friends, and the more I open up to them, the more I realize that, hey, everyone kind of feels similar. Like, if they don't feel the same, they can empathize with you. And it does, it does help, like Jane said, opening up to someone, voicing your concerns and not keeping them to yourself, because that can have a really bad effect on you. For me, it completely affected my sleeping. I wasn't able to get to sleep for quite some months. And just like, when I started to open up is when I just started to see positive changes. But yeah, I think, it's a non-linear healing process. So right now I feel very good, but that can change, and it doesn't have to, but I accept the fact that it can. And, just because I feel good now doesn't mean I'll feel good forever, but I might. It just, you don't know, but you have to be kind to yourself as well, like they said before, and just take care of yourself, especially in these circumstances. And that's kind of how my journey's gone for me personally.
Okay, and you said some of your symptoms were things like losing sleep and the pains in your stomach. Were there any other things in your more challenging days with anxiety that you would put down as being symptoms?
Personally, I didn't experience panic attacks at the start, but I started to experience them around year 10, and that happened for a couple years. They were few and far between, but it did happen, and those can be quite overwhelming, but I'm not an expert on, talking about all the symptoms on it, so I don't want to give anyone false information. But personally, it was just, the same tightness of the chest and the nausea, and I could sense when one was going to happen. So I had a few techniques that I went through. First, I just kind of let it play out, accept it, and just ride it through. And then, I'd get myself a nice warm drink. I take some deep breaths, like the classic stuff. And in the more challenging days, I guess it's just more of like it consumes your thoughts, all these worries that they don't need to, but you feel like you can't help it either. So it becomes a physical and emotional thing. And but yeah, luckily those have gone away, which is nice.
That's really good to hear. And you mentioned cognitive behavioural therapy, or CBT, and Jane has obviously works for CAMHS, which offers support to young people. Did you find getting help scary? And what would you say to a young person who was themselves perhaps scared of reaching out and getting professional support?
I did find getting help scary, actually. I think firstly because I was quite young. I was about 14 when I started to, I had to voice my concerns to my mom. But also it just can feel intimidating, because you have to accept it to voice your concerns, and maybe for some people they don't want to deal with it at all. I was one of those people. I tend to brush things off, so saying to myself, you do need to speak up for yourself to get help, to get it sorted, it can be scary. But I think what I learned having to do it, on 3 separate occasions, is that it's never as scary as you think it's going to be. People are much nicer than you think. And if you don't feel comfortable talking to a parent or a teacher, a friend, they can lead you in the right direction. I've spoken up for friends to different teachers with their permission, of course, but there's definitely someone out there that is willing to help you get the support you need. And if you don't feel comfortable speaking to anyone, there's helplines and things you can text and chat rooms, and there's so much available out there. And you're going to find someone that is willing to listen and is willing to help you. And I think, I completely empathize with the fact it does feel scary, but it's only going to help you in the long term.
Nice. Thank you, Amelia. A reminder, so those of you who are watching, if you've got any questions that you want to ask our panel, so whether that's Jane or Amelia or our final guest, Matt, then you can drop them in the chat, or you can use Slido anonymously. And Ollie is in question corner. Let's go over to Ollie. Ollie, how are you? What are the questions looking like? What are you seeing from young people?
We have had a few questions come in on Slido, which are anonymous, of course. They are for Jane. Do you want me to ask them now, or
no? Let's save them up. Let's save them up. We've got good things coming. It's just good to know that that's there and people are asking. So before we go on to our final guest, I want to play you a quick video clip. Some of you might know or have heard of a guy called Governor B. He's a Mobo Award-winning gospel artist, and he has shared some of his experiences through song. One of the songs he wrote on a previous album was related to a friend of his who took his own life. And I wanted to play you this because so far we've talked about anxiety and worry. And in a second, Matt's going to go on to talk about a few of the challenging things from his experience as well. But I wanted to touch on the element of suicide and, importantly, what it means and how you can get support if that's something you're feeling. So take a watch of this clip.
There's a song on your previous album called Easy Road, which was written about someone who took their own life. Yeah. And we hear the statistics around mental health in young people, and they are just absolutely staggering. What would you say to a young person who's struggling with mental health issues?
People love you. I think the thing about Easy Road was my friend that committed suicide. He was so loved. Like, he had a little boy and a girlfriend, and like all his friends thought the world of him, and he'd smile every day, but we didn't know what he was going through. And a small part of me feels like he didn't know how much he was loved. So the thing I'd say to anyone struggling with the same thing is that you might not know how much you mean to the people around you. And that's not to put pressure on you, but that's just to say, if you're going through anything, talk about it with people that love you, because they really care, and the last thing they want is for you to take your own life.
So I know that's a really difficult topic to talk about. So again, if you've got questions or you need support, then check out the links in the description of this video. Some of our panel have been sharing their ideas and suggestions of places you can go. So there's a couple of organizations in the description if you or your friends yourself need support. So our final guest of tonight is Dr. Matt Cox. Matt is on our team here. He helps out, but I'm going to let him introduce himself. Matt, good evening to you.
Hello. Hi, it's lovely to be here this evening. So yeah, as Sean said, I'm Matt. I am a doctor. I work in St Richard's Hospital, which is down in Chichester on the way to the coast. You don't need to know what I do. I work in the bit just after A&E. So if you have to come in from A&E, you'll probably meet me, but hopefully none of you will. I want to talk to you tonight about something that I really struggled with when I was a teenager. So probably between the ages of about 14 and 18. And that is about kind of self-esteem and, I mean, particularly having low self-esteem. And I want to talk to you about my journey through that and the things that helped me to change how I viewed myself. I think maybe this is something that will resonate for some of you, that this was definitely something that snuck up on me. And there's no moment where I can say, that's when I realized that this was a problem, but it just built up slowly over time. And I just ended up, one day realizing that I just didn't want to be me. I thought I was ugly. I thought I had no talent. I thought I was useless. I thought I wasn't clever enough or attractive enough or muscular enough or sporty enough or musical enough. I just thought I wasn't enough. And I looked around at the people around me at school and what I saw on social media, which at the time would have been Facebook, but also something called Bebo and MySpace, which I don't think are particularly used anymore. And I looked at films and TV and magazines, and I saw all these images, and I just tried to fit myself into those things, and I didn't match up. I couldn't see myself as being good enough or looking the right way or being smart enough. And it just crept up on me that I just had this kind of negativity that hung around me with how I looked at myself and how I thought of myself. And I don't think it made any particularly big things happen, but it just affects things on a day-to-day basis. I wouldn't put myself forwards for things. I absolutely couldn't publicly speak because who'd want to hear from me? And it just dragged me down. And at times I would, probably the worst things that happened was I would get really worked up if I didn't do well at things at school in an exam or a test. And sometimes that led to me kind of self-harming. But, there's no dramatic bits to my story. There's no big moment where I reached out and got help. It was just something that slowly kind of crept up on me and surrounded me and kind of swallowed me up. And then slowly, with the things I'll go on to talk about, it got better and how I viewed myself changed. And I'm very happy to say that I view myself very, very differently now to how I did then. But yeah, let's go on, so some of the things that really helped me and the things I think looking back that changed it. I think one of them is definitely having some really supportive friends and people I could share with and talk to and trust and kind of confide in that this is how I was feeling. And I was lucky to have a very nice supportive group of friends, but there's two people in particular who really come to mind who just responded with such positivity to my negativity. And I still got it. They wrote me this list of all the things that they thought were great about me. And I still have it. And I just remember reading it, and slowly over time that crept in, that actually, no, there were good things about me. There are positive things, and that positivity from them, that support, started to slowly eat away at the, and alter the way I view things. I was also really lucky to have some really supportive teachers at school. Now, I never confided in them that this is how I felt about myself. I don't think I ever really reached out to anyone other than some friends about it. But actually, without even knowing, these people were there supporting me in their lessons, in the subjects I was doing, and helping me to, giving me feedback that helped me do the best there. They really supported me when I said I wanted to apply to medical school, and helped me with writing my UCAS application. It's really hard to write an application bigging yourself up when you can't see yourself in a positive way. So that was really helpful as well. And yeah, just having those people who, even though they didn't know what was going on, they projected positivity onto me because they were supportive and said, "You're doing a good job, work on this," and and that really helped. I was also very lucky at my church to have a mentor who I worked with, who challenged me on how I kind of accepted the things I'm good at. And I think it's quite a British thing, but we're not very good at saying that we're good at things. We're quite good at, we think sometimes it comes across as arrogant or brash if we try and say we're good at something. We try and be humble and talk, but actually what's really important is owning the things you're good at. And this person got me to make a list. You can see I like a list. And they got me to write down all the things I was good at, and to take ownership of that and put it down and say, no, actually, I'm quite good at history. I'm quite good at chemistry. I'm good at this thing, and to own the gifts and talents that I had. And again, it's that positivity coming in, and that challenged my worldview and challenged how I saw myself. And I think all of those things feed into the ultimate thing which changed for me, which was my worldview and how I viewed myself, and how I viewed, I suppose, how I saw value in myself altered over time. And I think all of those things I've mentioned helped with that. I think my friends helped me change that. I think my teachers and my family helped me change that. Not directly, but indirectly. I think taking ownership of things I was good at helped me. And my faith certainly was part of that. But I think a really important bit that I'd like to kind of say to you guys was about how my relationship with social media changed. Social media I think is fantastic. I love using Twitter and Instagram, but if they're used in the wrong way or without thinking, actually there can be some really damaging messages that come from that. And that's certainly something that when I look back, I think is where a lot of my self-esteem issues came from, is from that I didn't, I was looking at these things and using them and saying, comparing myself to it. And so one of the things I think I did was I altered my relationship with that, and I altered how I view social media and stopped seeing it as something to aspire to, and realized that a lot of it is fake, and a lot of it is false and not true to real life. And that definitely helped. And I think what slowly happened over the years, and I think it really started to change between probably 18 and 20, is that how I viewed myself, how I saw value in myself changed, and I stopped comparing myself to other people, and I stopped putting my value in whether I met, whoever the most attractive person on the front of the magazines was, and actually other things became more important. One more thing I wanted to share with you was that even though, I don't have that view of myself at all anymore, I think it's really important for us to all acknowledge that actually these things can come up at any point. It's a bit like what Amelia was saying about not knowing if anxiety is going to come up again. I work as a doctor now, and I think I'm quite good at my job. But that doesn't mean that when I have, I have bad days or I have a really difficult few shifts, and as I'm sure you can imagine, the last year has been full of those. But I still suffer with something called imposter syndrome that comes on, sometimes out of the blue, and I'll just feel like, even though I am fully trained and do my job well and get good feedback, I'll just feel like, you don't deserve to be here. You're not good enough at this. You shouldn't be doing this. Unfortunately, now I'm in a place where I cope with that really differently. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that these things can come on at any time, even when you're doing well, and that, that's okay. That's normal. That's something that happens, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a sign that you're weak or not good enough. It's something that we all have to battle with. So I thought I'd just close with a few things that I think you guys might be able to do that would help yourselves or help others. And the first one is just be positive with your friends. Take time to tell your friends, actually, you're fantastic at that. What a great poem you wrote. How amazing you were on the football pitch today. You're just always so lovely and kind. Sharing those things can make a huge difference to someone, even if you don't realize it. Share with each other, make sure that you don't bottle these things up. Share with, a close friend who you can trust, someone at school, a parent, an older sibling, someone who, but make sure you don't just keep these things to yourself. Be careful with social media. Use it. Twitter's fantastic. They all have great things in them, but just be careful not to get lured in by the trim and the trappings of it. It's all better than it seems. And own your skills. Do that. If you're watching this, please sit down tonight or tomorrow and write down what you're good at and take ownership of that, because I bet you're fantastic at some things, and that's really important. I'm going to stop now before I go over my time by too much. Sorry, Sean.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Matt. Just to pick up on that last thing you said, that all sounds great advice, but is that still possible during lockdown? How can we champion ourselves and our friends in the middle of a pandemic?
It's a really good question. And I think, we're still all learning how we interact in a pandemic world where you can't go and do those things. But, it takes 10 seconds to write out a nice text to one of your mates and check how they're doing, or to reach out to them and say, that TikTok you made was hilarious. Something nice about what they've done, and to remind people of the things that they're really good at. And equally, as much as the pandemic has stopped us interacting as we usually do, things like, Zoom, most people have phones now. There's so many other ways of interacting. And I think we just have to be really deliberate about going out and reaching out to our friends for them and reaching out to our friends for us. I think that's what, the world is different now. There's no getting away from that. It's not going to magically go back to normal overnight. So I think it's time, what we have to do is just try and make the most of the world we're in at the moment. And that is using social media and phones for the positive thing that they're there for. We're so much more connected. So, reach out to your friends, show them a bit of love, and spread some positivity in your family as well.
Nice. Thank you, Matt. It's funny, no one ever says my TikToks are hilarious, just embarrassing. So I think I need to work on that. We've heard lots of stories tonight, but I want to share some statistics with you as well, because I know you might be watching this thinking, how am I the only one going through this? I seem to be struggling and my friends aren't. So some research suggests that here in the UK, that 1 in 6 children aged 5 to 16 are likely to have a mental health difficulty or problem. And 50% of all mental health issues start by the age of 14. And importantly, 75% of young people aren't getting the help that they need. So again, an encouragement that you're not suffering alone and that you should get support. Now we're going to go over to question corner to Ollie. Good evening, Ollie. I've browsed past the YouTube chat and it's quiet as normal, but I understand we've had some questions through anonymously on Slido.
We've had quite a few questions come in on Slido, all anonymous. We will try our best to answer them. Obviously, we probably won't get through to all of them, but we will try our best.
Yeah, go for it.
Excellent. So I think the first question is aimed more at Jane. What should I do when my parents put a lot of pressure on me?
Okay. Yeah, that's really difficult. I worked at Rosebery for a few years, and you're not on your own there. There's a lot of young people feel the same, that their parents are putting pressure on you. Sometimes it's unintentionally, but the pressure's still there. There's a variety of things you can do. It depends. I mean, one thing is to try and talk to your parents about how you're feeling. That depends on the relationship you have with them. The other thing is, I don't know what school you're at, but most schools now have, a pastoral team, and there are people there that you could go to and talk to about how you're feeling. And I know that I worked in student support, and I spoke to many young people feeling like you do. And what talking does, it helps you kind of unpack it and express it, and also get some support to sort of try and either talk to your parents or change how you're feeling and thinking about it. Because often I think we take on our parents, that our parents want us to succeed, and we take that on as thoughts for ourselves. And sometimes it's about changing those thoughts. That's what I do quite a lot of young people, and thinking, if just do well enough, sort of thing. You don't have to get sort of 100%. And there's a lot of sort of perfectionism around. There's a lot of pressure to get really high grades and succeed. And just by talking to someone and help you sort of unpack that, and how you don't need to get 100% and not grade 9 at GCSEs and in high levels in A level to be successful in life, And yeah, so two things: just try and talk to someone about how you're feeling, and just talking will help you unpack it. And just to tell yourself, it's not, you don't need to get really high grades to succeed in life. There's loads of people out there that haven't done that and have done perfectly well. And I think ultimately it's about your happiness, and you won't feel happy with that sort of pressure on you. So yeah.
Thank you, Jane. The next question I have here is for Matt. How do I help a friend who I think is self-harming?
Say it's a really difficult question. I think there's probably no right answer to that. I think being there for them and listening to them when they share with you is really important. I think if someone is self-harming, it's really important that you do encourage them to get support, whether that's going to, one of the things that schools have in place now to support them, or, if getting them to open up to their parents so they can get support from them, and, maybe by going to the GP. But I think those are the two biggest things. I think is one is just being there for them, supporting them, and the other is getting them to share with someone who can get them more support. Yeah, it's really difficult though, and that there are no right answers. So it's really easy when you're in that position to feel like you're letting them down, and it's important to remember that these things have no easy answers to them, and that you just have to do your best.
Thank you very much, Matt. So Amelia, the next question I have here is for you. The question is asking, do you need a diagnosis? And I was wondering if you could share about what the benefits of getting a diagnosis were?
I would say that you definitely don't need one. You know your body best, so you can tell when you feel off. You can tell if you're feeling, overly worried or anxious or anything like that. I think the benefits of getting a diagnosis is that you can just pinpoint how you're feeling. Putting a name to it sometimes does help because then you can research it a little bit. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend doing too much because we all know too much of the internet can be overwhelming. But just, getting a name to it, and then that can direct you in getting help in the right way. You don't feel like that's just another thing that you don't know. I feel like personally, I knew what I had and I could do something about it once I knew. But I don't think it's a huge problem if you don't have a diagnosis because you know how you feel. So.
Thank you very much. So I'm just finding the next question. So this question is probably more aimed towards Jane. What if my worries appear, or for me, are completely irrational?
What if your worries appear irrational? I presume you're saying your worries appear irrational to you?
I think that's the gist of the question, yes.
The people, yeah. I suppose that's what I was talking about when we were talking about changing your unhelpful thoughts. So maybe irrational thoughts, we can see them as unhelpful thoughts, because unhelpful thoughts can make us feel anxious. So what you need to try and do is to just think about making that unhelpful thought into a more helpful thought. And as a result, that will sort of lessen hopefully it will lessen the anxiety. And then for part of that, we call it putting thoughts on trial. So it's like, to identify the thought that is irrational or unhelpful, and then try and make it into more of a helpful thought. And you can kind of take it through a load of questions, like a bit like, what would my mum say if I said that was my thought? What would my friend say? What would I say to a friend who had that thought? Is it a fact, what I'm thinking, or is it just an opinion? And just by sort of taking yourself through those questions, it can help you make it into a more of a helpful thought. And just to be aware of it, there's a lot of stuff around it's quite helpful, and just like unhelpful thinking styles, things like fortune telling, like predicting the future, going way ahead and thinking, I used to work with young people that they start off with failing an assessment, and if I failed an assessment, I'd fail my exam, my GCSEs, and then I won't get a job, and then I'd be homeless. Those sort of things. Can you see that? And that takes you into that sort of that fortune telling, and how that can make you feel very sort of anxious and stuff. So there's other thinking. So just to be aware of the thinking style you're using, and that can make that thought unhelpful as well. Or other things like just focusing on the negative and not on the positive things you're doing. And the thoughts become sort of, I suppose it's been imbalanced, isn't it? It's leaning too much to the negative. So to try and bring it back to the positive sort of thing. But there's loads of stuff on things like YouTube and some of the resources at I think Sean's got on the slide that you can find help.
Thank you very much. So Matt, I have a question for you. What were your healthy coping mechanisms that helped you when you were feeling down and self-harm?
what were my healthy coping mechanisms? I suppose at the time I didn't really have healthy coping mechanisms, hence why I kind of ended up self-harming. I think one of the things I started doing was making sure that if I had something that would have triggered me to do that, which would normally be getting a piece of work back that I'd done worse than I wanted to on, or, you know, an exam I hadn't done well in, would be to go and talk to, you know, go and be with some of my friends. And instead of isolating myself in those periods, actually I would go and be with other people, and be with some people who are positive and, you know, something to distract me. I think that's one of the things I did. And I think it was about, you know, rationalizing. It's a bit like what we've just been talking about. I think a lot of it can be that you put all these pressures on yourself. And so, you know, I would just, you know, it is go through it in my head. You know, this is one test. It is one exam. It is not the end of the world. These things, you know, and to make sure that I kind of, instead of running away with, you've messed up, try and rationalize it to, actually, this hasn't gone as well. What can you learn from it? What will I do differently? And to try and turn it to a positive. I have to say, I don't think that's something I got good at until much later, but I think those are the two things that, yeah, that stand out to me.
Thank you very much. So Amelia, now that you're at university, I was wondering if you could mention any support that you've seen at uni, or whether that's for you or another person.
Yeah, so I think it is important to kind of be honest and say there has been a lot in the media and personal experiences of unis not providing enough at the moment, through personal experience of help with my flatmates, but just generally, you know, I think people are still learning, so we do want to give them a little bit of, you know, safety, but I think more can be done. But there have been lots of posters for access to mental health resources, websites, phone calls. There's a lot of societies actually have been doing a lot if you're part of that society, you can talk to people through that. I'm personally part of the rugby team. We do Wednesday well-being sessions every Wednesday night just to check in with each other and see how it's going. I think if you're at school, you know, there's still the helplines. I understand and I empathize with the fact that calling someone can be very daunting sometimes. And I know Samaritans does email. So if it's not urgent or an emergency, you can email and get help that way. But, you know, just a quick Google search will bring up loads of helpful resources. There's some, I think, on the slides for this as well in the drop down or something. So it's just a quick question to someone, or a Google search, or, you know, posters, and you'll find your help almost immediately. But yeah, at uni, they're doing their best, I think, but getting involved in a society has been helpful for me. Just, it feels a bit more personal that way.
Thank you very much. So I think we're coming to our last question for this evening, which links back to what I think Jane is about to talk about next, actually. So I'll ask Jane. I feel very lonely during lockdown. I'm worried and anxious with the possibility of going back to school, with being around so many people again.
Yeah. I think what I want to say to you is you're not on your own. You know, there's a lot of people feeling like you are, and it's really hard, isn't it? Because we've been based in our houses and just sort of online, really, and really restricted in who we can see. And so I mean, what I'd suggest is, you know, just be kind to yourself. You know, this won't go on forever. The schools will reopen, and I think just start to make connections with people you feel comfortable with in a way you feel comfortable, if it's just a text or talking to someone as well is really important. If you can share how you're feeling with someone that you trust, that's really important as well. And I think I think a lot of people will be feeling that. I mean, it feels like you've been at home a long time during this lockdown, and it will be really strange to go back and be amongst so many people and back to like a normal like routine and structure. And I think part of it is, yeah, I just think try to connect with someone in, you know, just take little steps. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Be kind to yourself and just do things that feel comfortable and do it sort of slowly and believe you will get back there. But I think, yeah, it is about just talking about how you're feeling to people. And I think you'll realise that you're not on your own as well. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there feeling like you're feeling. Yeah, I think, shall I talk about the return to school? And well, yeah, I think I've just got a few things here really. I mean, part of returning to school is kind of trying to face it. I think it's really tempting just to avoid thinking about it and not open those emails from teachers or those connections from people linked with school and friendship. But I think it will help. It helps just to try and sort of face it and plan a bit about what going back to school looks like for you as an individual, and try and talk to someone about how you're feeling about it. Like we said, talk about your worries with someone that you trust. It could be a teacher, it could be a parent, it could be another friend. You know, there might be you might have other people in your lives, other friendships, other friends feeling the same way as you, and you actually being open about how you're feeling might help them talk about how they're feeling as well. Yeah, find out the facts, and if there's any worry, you know, any potential problems that you see, just try and talk to someone and problem solve it a bit. You know, come up with a few solutions for it that you feel happy with, and so I think a lot of it is facing it, planning, being honest about how you feel. Yeah, and another thing, yeah, and try to arrange to maybe meet for a friend in a park or something, just to sort of make that connection. And even when you do get back to school, just keep talking, keep getting support from teachers. I think what's really good at the moment, there's been a lot of stuff in schools on sort of well-being and mental health, and you know, the schools are very aware of the impact this time has had on their young people, and you know, I think they're in, you know, they're prepared to sort of be, you know, there's things in place in the schools, that people that you can talk to if you need to. And sometimes it's just starting off with a teacher you feel comfortable with. That's how it worked a bit at Rosebery. You know, the teachers are very good at sort of, with your permission, of course, communicating with someone else on your behalf if that's what you want. So just start with someone you feel comfortable with to talk about how you're feeling. Yeah, I think the other thing I've got here is of it, be aware of, know yourself and be aware of what, you know, there might be certain people that sort of make you feel more anxious about the situation, about going back, or again, social media. So just be aware of what makes you feel more anxious and try and sort of avoid those things and be around the people that make you feel more positive and stuff. That's not always easy, but just be aware of the impact of social media and people in your life that might make you feel sort of more negative and stuff. So yeah. And then the last thing I want to say is, just because we don't know what the future holds, you know, at the moment we still don't know when the schools will reopen, don't assume it's bad, you know, it's not going to be a bad outcome. It's just you just don't know at the moment. And just to try and remember, you know, focus, there's lots we can't control, and just try and forget about that and just focus on the bits you can control about your return to school. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you all of you guys for getting involved. Thank you for all the questions we had. Those were some really kind of brave questions. Ollie shared some of them with me, and yeah, so thank you for being so brave in asking those. And thank you, lovely panel, for sharing. You've been great. Thanks for giving up your time. If you're at home, do you want to give them a little round of applause? I know that's weird. It's what we do if we were in person somewhere. But as all the panel have said, make sure you get support if that is something you need. Amelia mentioned Samaritans. There's Childline as well. There's some of the obvious ones. We've got some other suggestions in the description that involve texting for support. And perhaps it's self-harm that's an issue for you, and you might want to guide yourself through a course. And for that, I recommend selfharm.co.uk. They have a course called Amelia. It's an anonymous course for 14 to 19-year-olds to get help with self-harm. Young Minds is on there as well, which is great, with lots of blogs and places to get support. And of course, as Jane has talked about, as you move back into school, or if you're at university as well, talk to your lecturers, talk to your supervisors, talk to your teachers, any of the pastoral staff at your school or university. They want to help. That's what they're there for. But it can be really challenging, kind of, guys, to take that first step to get help. So we encourage you to do so. Well, thank you again, panel. And to all you watching, we're hoping that our pandemic will come to a gradual end and that we'll move back into our lives. But let's keep our mental health on the surface. Let's keep it something we're aware of. Let's keep talking about it with our friends and our family. Let's start those conversations. So from us, thank you for joining us. If you've got any other questions, do reach out and get in touch. But other than that, thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.